Welcome to today's lesson on the evolution of communication through technology, meaning how our forms of communication have evolved. We begin with the objectives. You will be able to trace the evolution of communication from its beginning to the modern age. Also, you will be able to develop an understanding and awareness of the total process of communication. Your standards are the following. You will be able to participate in collaborative decisions and build ideas. You will also present your findings and support evidence so that your audience can follow along. Lastly, you will gather important information from many sources and put it into text. You also have some essential questions that you must answer, which are the following. What is communication? How do we communicate with others? Why do we communicate? How has technology helped with communication? Key terms are very important, and make sure you identify the following key terms. Our introduction. We need to remember that as humans, we have a natural call to communicate with others. At one time, there was long distances, and it made it hard to keep in touch. Yet we still had that need to communicate, no matter the distance. Developing technology really stepped it up and made it possible for us to stay in constant contact. Now, the earliest form of communication were smoke signals. You might be thinking smoke signals were used by Native Americans, and yet the Chinese defending the Great Wall would use them to warn their comrades of attack. You then have the Greeks come along, and just as they developed democracy, they needed to improve smoke signals, and they end up inventing a system to go toward smoke signals. So I guess we can say that the Greeks are overachievers. This brings us to one of the oldest and still used forms of communication known as letters. Now, for many of you, the thought of writing a letter is appalling. But remember, when all technology fails, you still have a surefire way of communicating. With different forms of delivery being used, Rowan Hill came up with the postage idea and became the father of the postal system. Congratulations. It's a stamp. Next, we have Gutenberg's printing press. This simplified and made works accessible to people. You didn't have to wait for months on any written work. You now had many copies and plenty to distribute. You can thank Gutenberg for the wonderful textbooks you have at your disposal. We move on to the telegraph and Morse code. For Samuel Morse, the mail was too slow and not his friend. Since he didn't receive a letter in time, he found out his wife died while he believed she was ill. He develops a telegraph system that uses coded dots to match the alphabet. He names the code after himself. What good does it do to invent something if you can't name it after yourself? Our introduction. We need to remember that as humans, we have a natural call to communicate with others. At one time, there was long distances, and it made it hard to keep in touch. Yet we still had that need to communicate, no matter the distance. Developing technology. You come to the next form of communicating and distributing information. The radio came about from inventors trying to create a wireless telegraph. Instead, they learned to generate radio waves, and with Nikola Tesla working on this experiment, the radio is born. Radio became a surefire hit, yet evolution would occur 28 years later with the birth of television. Even though the first television showed 12 frames per minute, it was remarkable. Television is still part of the world fabric, and now we have more options to use in terms of size, models, and channels. A new way of communicating without having to hear someone was known as email. In the 1970s, they found a way to send a message from one computer to another. The one downside was that both computers needed to be on and both parties had to be online to send and receive messages. This brings us to our current form of communication, the cell phone. In 1973, a mobile phone was developed, yet the clunky prototype would be referred as the brick for its size and shape. Today's cell phones are smaller and sleeker, with more functionality in a pocket-sized device. Your assignments for this lesson. Students will answer essential questions in complete sentence form. Students will also identify all key terms and give examples. Students must research all forms of communication from key terms. Students will also provide a timeline for the forms of communication starting with smoke signals through FaceTime. With new technology, we are now able to communicate across the globe and even in space instantaneously. This concludes our lecture.